In the final days before his arrest, Jesus pulled aside 3 of his disciples, Peter, John, and Mary Magdalene, and led them to a quiet place away from the others. His expression was grave. Not with fear of what was coming for him, but with concern for what would happen to them after he was gone. He sat them down and said, "I need to warn you about something. Something that will catch most of the chosen ones. Not because they are weak. Not because they lack devotion. But because the trap I am about to describe feels like the very thing you are seeking. It feels like peace. Like surrender. Like finally letting go. And most will walk directly into it believing they have reached enlightenment when they have actually entered the final containment." The 3 disciples leaned in, confused. They had heard Jesus warn about many things: false teachers, persecution, the archons, spiritual pride. But this was something new. A trap that feels like surrender. Jesus continued. You will face trials. You will face exhaustion. You will face moments when the spiritual journey feels too hard, too confusing, too overwhelming. And in those moments, something will offer itself to you. A voice. A feeling. A teaching. And it will say, stop striving. Stop seeking. Stop trying so hard. Just surrender. Just let go. Just accept. Just trust. Everything is as it should be. Stop questioning. Stop discerning. Just be. And this voice will feel right. It will feel peaceful. It will feel like exactly what you need after all the struggle, all the effort, all the constant vigilance. It will feel like the relief you have been praying for. And most will accept it. Most will believe they are finally surrendering to God, to the divine will, to the flow of life. But they will not be. They will be surrendering to the false realm. Giving up awareness. Trading discernment for comfort. And once they do, they will be trapped. Not in obvious suffering. But in a kind of spiritual sleep that feels like peace but is actually containment. Mary Magdalene asked, "But teacher, you have taught us to surrender. To let go. To stop resisting. How do we know the difference between true surrender and this trap you are describing?" Jesus smiled, recognizing the precision of her question. "That is exactly what I am going to show you. Because the difference is subtle. So subtle that most will never see it. And that is why this trap catches the chosen ones. Those who have done the work. Those who know about the archons. Those who have learned to discern. Even they fall for this one. Because it feels like the culmination of the path. Like the final release. When it is actually the final trap. This teaching was never written down in any gospel. It was too dangerous. Too easily misunderstood. Because it challenges the concept of surrender itself, the very practice that most spiritual paths consider the ultimate goal. But Jesus taught it clearly to those ready to understand. The warning about false surrender. About the trap that catches even advanced souls. About the moment when letting go becomes giving up. When peace becomes passivity. When surrender becomes sleep. If you are watching this video, if you have experienced moments of sudden peace that felt like breakthrough but led to stagnation, if you have surrendered only to find yourself numb rather than free. If you have let go of seeking only to discover you also let go of awareness, then you need to hear this warning. Because the trap feels like surrender. And that is precisely why it works. True surrender is not collapse. It is not giving up. It is not checking out. True surrender is the release of false control while maintaining full awareness. It is recognizing that you cannot force reality to bend to your will, that you cannot control outcomes through ego, that you must allow life to unfold rather than constantly trying to manipulate it. But in that allowing, in that release of control, awareness remains. Presence remains. Clarity remains. You are still here. Still observing. Still discerning. Still responsive. You have just stopped trying to force specific outcomes. Stopped identifying with results. Stopped believing that your worth depends on making things happen. That is true surrender. Conscious. Aware. Present. But not controlling. False surrender is different. False surrender is abdication. It is the moment when you stop not just controlling, but caring. When you stop not just forcing outcomes, but observing what is actually happening. When you let go not just of attachment to results, but of awareness itself. And you call it peace. You call it trust. You call it surrender. But it is actually giving up. Not giving up the false self. Giving up discernment. Giving up responsibility. Giving up the vigilance that keeps you aware of what is true and what is manipulation. And the false realm specializes in presenting false surrender as spiritual maturity. It waits until you are exhausted. Until you have been seeking for years. Until you have done so much inner work that you are tired. So tired. Tired of vigilance. Tired of discernment. Tired of constant awareness. Tired of the spiritual journey itself. And in that exhaustion, it whispers. You have done enough. You do not need to try anymore. You do not need to be so careful, so discerning, so vigilant. Just surrender. Just trust. Just let go. Everything is unfolding perfectly. You are safe. You can rest now. And that message feels like exactly what you need. Like permission to finally stop. Like the reward for all your effort. Like spiritual maturity. Like enlightenment itself. And you accept it. You surrender. Not to truth. But to exhaustion. Not to clarity. But to the promise of relief. And in that surrender, awareness dims. Discernment fades. Questions stop. And you settle into a kind of peace that is actually numbness. A kind of trust that is actually passivity. A kind of letting go that is actually giving up. Jesus understood this trap intimately. He faced it himself in Gethsemane. The exhaustion. The overwhelming weight of what he was about to face. The desire to escape. To be done. To surrender not to divine will but to the relief of not having to continue. And he prayed. Not a prayer of petition. But a prayer of discernment. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will but yours be done. That prayer is often interpreted as submission. As Jesus accepting his fate. But it was not. It was Jesus distinguishing between false surrender and true surrender. The first part, let this cup pass from me, was acknowledgement of the human desire to escape. The exhaustion. The temptation to give up. To check out. To abdicate responsibility. But the second part, not my will but yours, was clarity. It was the recognition that true surrender is not escape. It is alignment. Not with what feels easy. Not with what promises relief. But with what is actually true. With what must happen even if it is difficult. Even if it requires continuing when every part of you wants to stop. And after that prayer, after that moment of discernment between false surrender and true surrender, Jesus rose. He did not collapse. He did not check out. He did not become passive. He remained aware. Present. Responsive. And he moved forward to face what was coming. Not because he forced himself. But because true surrender clarified the path. And clarity requires presence, not sleep. This is what he was trying to teach his disciples. That surrender without awareness is not surrender. It is abdication. And abdication is exactly what the false realm needs. Not your resistance. Not your fight. Not your questioning. Your passivity. Your acceptance. Your checking out while calling it spiritual maturity, because a passive soul does not question, Does not observe. Does not discern. It just accepts. Whatever is presented. Whatever is suggested. Whatever is imposed. And it calls that acceptance surrender. It calls that passivity peace. It calls that abdication trust. But it is none of those things. It is containment. And the containment is effective precisely because it feels like freedom. The signs of false surrender are subtle but consistent. And Jesus taught his disciples to watch for them. Not in others, but in themselves. Because false surrender does not announce itself. It presents as breakthrough. As finally getting it. As spiritual maturity. And only later, sometimes much later, do you realize you traded awareness for comfort. Discernment for peace. Responsibility for relief. The first sign is sudden emotional numbness. You have been feeling deeply. Processing. Working through patterns. And then suddenly, you do not feel much of anything. Not peace as presence. But peace as absence. Absence of emotion. Absence of concern. Absence of the intensity that characterized your seeking. And you interpret this as progress. As transcendence. As moving beyond the emotional body. But it is not. It is shut down. The nervous system protecting itself from overwhelm by going numb. The consciousness retreating from engagement because engagement has become too costly. And you call it surrender when it is actually dissociation. Checking out. Becoming unavailable to reality because reality has become too much. True surrender does not numb. It clarifies. Emotions still arise. But you do not identify with them. You do not become them. You witness them. You allow them. You respond to them when appropriate. But you remain present. Aware. Engaged. Not emotionally reactive. But emotionally available. The second sign is loss of inner questioning. You have been asking questions. Seeking truth. Discerning what is real and what is manipulation. And then suddenly, the questions stop. Not because you have found answers. But because questioning feels exhausting. And something inside says, stop asking. Just trust. Just accept. Questions are the ego trying to maintain control. And you believe it. You stop questioning. You stop discerning. You accept what is presented without examination. And you call it surrender. You call it trust. You call it spiritual maturity. But it is not. It is giving up discernment. Trading awareness for the relief of not having to think critically anymore. And without discernment, without the capacity to distinguish truth from manipulation, you become vulnerable to every false teaching, every archonic suggestion, every trap that presents itself as divine will. True surrender does not stop questioning. It stops identifying with the need for specific answers. You still ask. You still observe. You still discern. But you are not attached to outcomes. Not desperate for certainty. Not clinging to beliefs. You remain open. Curious. Aware. And that awareness includes the capacity to question what is being presented to you. The third sign is relief that replaces clarity. You feel a sudden sense of relief. The burden has lifted. The struggle is over. You can finally rest. And that relief feels so good, so needed, so deserved after all your effort, that you do not question it. You do not examine whether the relief is coming from alignment with truth or from giving up the effort to discern truth. And that is the trap. Because relief is not the same as clarity. Relief is the nervous system relaxing after stress. Clarity is consciousness recognizing what is true. And sometimes clarity brings relief. But sometimes it does not. Sometimes clarity reveals that the path continues. That there is more to face. That rest is not yet appropriate. And if you are seeking relief more than truth, if you are willing to accept false surrender because it feels better than continued vigilance, you will be caught. True surrender brings clarity first. And sometimes that clarity is uncomfortable. Sometimes it reveals that you must continue. That you must face what you were hoping to avoid. That the struggle is not over yet. But you accept it. Not because you want to. But because clarity shows you that acceptance is what aligns with truth. And alignment with truth, even uncomfortable truth, brings a different kind of peace. Not relief as escape. But peace as presence. As being exactly where you are without resistance.